Find a new way to live in Toronto's coveted Forest Hill neighborhood. Foray by Canderel blends thoughtful, livable suite design with refined finishes and more than 50,000 square feet of amenities, including wellness spaces, work-from-home areas, fitness facilities, and places to unwind. A modern, elevated community crafted for the life you've earned. Your next home starts from $599,000. Learn more at live@foray.ca. That's live@FORET.ca.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Maltz Bovy, and you're listening to The Jewish Angle from the Canadian Jewish News. This is a podcast that covers this sort of ineffable thing called discourse, what people are talking about in what used to be called the online world, but is now just basically opinion, opining. And there really isn't as much offline as there used to be since the pandemic, so I'm never sure how to talk about this. And I think of myself as somebody who's pretty online. If there's drama on Twitter, which has now itself splintered off into X, which is what Twitter became, and Blue Sky, I generally keep track. And by drama, I mean anything to do with sort of the place of Jews in society these days, sort of torn between left and right, things like this. If it's happening on Substack, I will probably know. If it's happening on Threads or TikTok, someone might tell me. I was like, I almost want to say today years old when I learned that there was such a thing as Twitch. It's a big internet, and apparently that is the source of the man of the moment, the person everybody's talking about, who I had not heard of until very recently, Hasan Piker. I don't know what's a Hasan Piker. No, I vaguely know who he is. I have Googled him and all of this. And I also then went very quickly from knowing that this was a man with some kind of significance in the Jewish world, that was he an anti-Semite? Was he not an anti-Semite? I knew that this was a whole thing. Before I had a chance to even really think about this, suddenly he was on the New York Times opinion video section in conversation with the very well-known and well-liked writer Gia Tolentino and Nadia Spiegelman, who's the daughter of Art Spiegelman, who made Mouse. So I was like, okay, there's like definitely like 5,000 Jewish angles here. I cannot make sense of all of these alone. Certainly not, which is why I am so very pleased to have back on journalist and author Emily Tamkin. Emily, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
So Emily, you wrote a really great piece that was very helpful in making sense of all of this, both offering an introduction to the remaining uninitiated about who Hasan Piker even is, as well as offering some more broadly relevant advice, some of which I agree with, some of which less so, but it's all sensible advice about how Jews can sort of face the moment. And the article's in the foreword called American Jews Have a Hasan Piker Problem. Solving it is going to hurt. If I'm not on whatever's a Twitch, why would I necessarily need to know who Hasan Piker is?
I'm also not on Twitch, I should say.
I thought you were twitching right now on the whatever it means.
In some ways, yes, but no. As a 36-year-old woman, I'm also not like up on the latest streamers. And the reason that I know who Hasan Piker is because of, as you say, discourse. So Hasan Piker is a left-wing streamer, which is to say that he, for hours on end, will record himself just sort of popping off and talking and opining while on video, and people comment along. And this, in the political moment the cultural political moment that we live in, this is very popular, and particularly it's popular with young men, which if Canadian listeners may remember from November that Democratic politicians are really struggling with this from November 2024, I guess. What is the passage of time? Are really struggling with this demographic and with how to reach them. So there's this live question of, okay, well, after the last presidential election, there was all this conversation about who is the left's Joe Rogan and how can we on the left also be reaching young men who are spending their time getting their information from streamers. And so there's, there became a live question of, well, how much do politicians engage with Hasan Piker? Can you go on his show? Do you campaign with him? And here's the reason that this is particularly relevant to Jews is that Hasan Piker is, staunchly opposed to Zionism and to Israel. And also has made comments that I think are, some of which I would say are just outright. It doesn't matter if you call lots of different types of people inbred, which he apparently does. You cannot call Orthodox Jews inbred, right? Like that plays on an anti-Semitic trope.
So
yes.
I just want to. So it seems like he's a provocateur.
Absolutely,
would be the thing. So would somebody like that, and an entertainer, right? So I don't say any of that as a and then therefore it's fine, because obviously look who became president of the United States. Like obviously that somebody's an entertainer doesn't mean that they aren't heading towards actual political power, right? But it does seem like some of this parsing of, and I think it's a phrase you used when talking about and praising Arno Rosenfeld's good article about another sort of provocateur moment, this needle threading, right? Like there's a lot of needle threading that I think whether or not we want to be doing, we all end up doing about like, is this anti-Semitism? Is this something else? Is it a criticism? Whatever. But I feel like there's this third axis or something, as it were, that's like, is this somebody like, or is this not even like, is it or is it not anti-Semitic, but like, this is not necessarily like a coherent political ideology. It might be a TV, not a TV show, an internet show. I should say I am a 42-year-old woman whose main non-work use of the internet is like looking at 1980s Laura Ashley dresses on Poshmark, right? So like, I don't know what any of this is, but yeah. Anyway.
No, I agree with that. And I think that's right. And I think part of this is people ascribing sort of policy motivation to him that he doesn't necessarily have, or taking, like, this is somebody who's talking for hours on end and taking one comment and being like, that's a really deeply thought out comment, which it may be, right? I'm sure that they're, I'm not trying to say that he like, oh, he doesn't really mean it. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that I think that we are giving some of these statements policy weight that they don't have, because we're talking about a streamer, not a staff writer.
Well, it's tricky. I mean,
but who's engaging with politicians, right?
Right. I mean, I would say, like, I think it does matter a lot. And that's why this is kind of hard to discuss, because I think you have this valence that's really dominant now on the right, where it's like, I'm joking, but I'm not joking. I'm trolling, but I'm not trolling. And it seems that he does the same thing, but on the left. So it's not just that he's the Joe Rogan of the left insofar as like young men who are very online are aware of who he is. I think with Joe Rogan, it's not just that demographic. But regardless, there's something where that is politics now. You know what I mean? And like the staff writer can write some kind of staid thing or be replaced by an AI that writes the staid thing. And then you have somebody like this who's sort of like saying the absolute edgiest thing. Mm-hmm. And then that is the mainstream now.
Right. And I guess the point that I was trying to get across in that article is that I think this is, so the question is then, what do you do with that? Right. Mm-hmm. You try to say, okay, this person is off limits and we can't engage with him because of the edgiest version of what he said. Do you try to parse these different comments? Do you try to engage but push back at times? And I think, to me, what's been interesting is that some of what he said has been really almost completely misrepresented in order to sort of paint everything that he said with this broad anti-Semitic brush to say he should be totally off limits, we can't engage with him. And I guess what I argue in that piece is that if your goal is really to try to push back on anti-Semitism in American, Canadian, et cetera, political discourse, I think we really need to think about, okay, well, what is it that I'm trying to do? And is my current behavior helping me reach those goals? Because, for example, you had some people say that he he loves violence and he boosted the attack in Boulder, Colorado. This was an arson attack on a walk in support of the hostages. And in fact, he condemned it, right? I don't think that that's helpful to our goal of making it of having mainstream, not just mainstream, broad, near universal recognition that violence against Jews is wrong, right? Like to just misrepresent what somebody says. And so I think there's sort of two entangled but separate questions, which is one, how do you engage with this non-political political figure? And two, how do you make sense of, how do you do so in a way that is helpful and not hurtful to Jews, you know?
So I think that's all very smart. And I have a couple sort of questions that get at this from different angles. Before we will, I promise, address the whole Gia Tolentino Lemon issue.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's very entertaining. And also I might ask you, just because I saw that you've written about this, briefly about Lena Dunham and her reputation.
Sure.
Her sort of revival, her comeback. I read the book. Did you read?
Did
you read Famous? Oh, okay. So I won't spoil it, but surprise, at the end of it, Lena Dunham is a best-selling author.
Yeah,
so that's again, I guess probably. Anyway, but back to Twitch streamers and the youths of today. So I want to talk just about like principles versus strategy. Because you write, is blaming or trying to silence or sideline people who speak critically of Israel the thing that's going to get people to change their minds? So I get why, if you yourself are someone who shares many of the criticisms of Israel up for discussion, obviously not all, but many of them, and I don't mean you personally, but just if one is, you would not want to silence such people. But let's say you're somebody who doesn't, and you're more in the kind of anti-Zionism. Is anti-Semitism school, or the sort of like Adam Lewis Klein, the thing to fight, is anti-Zionism school, or one of those schools, right? If you're someone like that, would they or should they change their principles just because they see that opinion polling is showing that theirs is a losing cause? Like, I guess I'm wondering, how would you convince somebody who doesn't think that that somebody like Hasan Piker is fundamentally coming from the right place, but too much of a provocateur and saying some nasty things, but somebody who just genuinely thinks he's wrong,
right,
politically? Like, how do they engage? You know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean. And I think it's a hard question, because I think that his popularity around specifically this issue is a symptom, not the cause. Like, this is my personal feeling, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that it's the case that people are listening to Hasan Piker and therefore they're becoming more critical of Israel or they're becoming anti-Zionist. I think that if you look at, as you say, all of the polling, really in the last 2 years, particularly Democratic voters in the United States have shifted. They're now more sympathetic to Palestinians. They're more critical of Israel. This is including, by the way, Democrats over the age of 50 who I think are not getting their views or their news from Piker.
Nope, they're right there with me on Poshmark looking at the
used
clothing.
Or Ashley dresses.
Yeah.
And so I think that raises the question of like, well, why is that? I'm just going to say, I think it's primarily their views are being driven by the conflict itself, right? By Israel itself. They're seeing that they also spent last summer reading about Israel not letting food into Gaza. And the people who have these views might say, well, it's more complicated than that. That's not fair. Okay, fine. But my point is that the reason that people are changing their minds is not Hasan Piker. And if you say he has to be persona non grata, I'm going to call any politician who appears with him or who talks to him or who uplifts him or who, whatever, an anti-Semite, I really think that all you're doing, I actually think that you're making your cause look worse, because you can't even defend it. Like, you're not trying to engage on the merits anymore. You're not trying to say, no, here's why it's more complicated. Here's why it's wrong. You're not trying to go to your partners in Israel and say, hey, like, here's how this is playing in the United States and Canada and wherever else. You're just trying to shut down the discussion around it. And as Jay Michelson, who's also a columnist at The Forward, has put it, in some ways and I want to say, like, anti-Semitism is the fault of anti-Semites, right? So I'm not trying to say that these people are who are doing this are to blame for anti-Semitism. But as Jay Michelson said, like, in a way, it does confirm an anti-Semitic prior, which is that, like, oh, look, you're not allowed to criticize the Jews, right? Because now they're shutting them down and now they're calling anti-Semites. And I think there are times when that's worth it, right? Like, I personally think that saying we won't engage with Nick Fuentes, who's a literal Holocaust denier, like, yeah, you can say that that's the Jews exercising too much power. I think that's worth it. I think that's worth the calculation. I just don't see how it is in this case. And I don't think I'm telling people to abandon their principles, right? Like, I understand that what he's saying is extremely offensive to them. There are things that he says that are extremely offensive to me, but I guess where I get stuck is, but how does trying to say that he's the same as Nick Fuentes, or how does trying to say that any politician who appears with him will never get your, like, how does this get you closer to what you want?
Well, isn't it sort of an Overton window thing, right? It's like,
Right.
if you can make it, if you win, and I mean, so that kind of gets to my next question, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot in a variety of cases, and this kind of interests me because it's such an interesting illustration of it. I'm not a Mideast expert. That is not really my area, but it's more the discourse aspect. And obviously, always the stuff with the Jewish angle, being that this is the Jewish angle. But I wanted to just talk about this question of platforming, because people talk about this a lot. And because it just sort of hit me that we're kind of talking about two different questions. One is whether Hasan Piker specifically, or any individual specifically, is someone either of us would or wouldn't want to platform.
Right.
The other is whether deplatforming itself is even meaningfully possible, whether that's even a thing.
Right.
And I just want to pause for a moment on that second question before we talk a little bit more about the first bit. So this was not Hasan Piker's first appearance in the New York Times, this opinion thing with Gia Tolentino and her knapsack full of illicit lemons or whatever. We will get to that. Before that, he had already appeared in conversation with Ross Douthat, New York Times columnist Ross Douthat. He had received a lifestyle type profile about how he's so dashing and muscular and 6'4", and yet he's straight but in touch with his feminine side. And it's very like, I mean, I guess fawning might be overstating it, because it's also a bit like he's exemplifying something about our times. But yeah, it's like a pretty flattering and like, we have to care about this person now thing. And he's also mentioned a lot. What would it mean? Is he being platformed if he already has a huge platform? And I guess I wrote about this in my column for the CJN, comparing this to when people talked about Louis C.K. After Me Too, because people were saying like, oh, we can't be forgiving Louis C.K. We can't be platforming him. Meanwhile, he was like selling sold out auditorium, whatever performances, stand-up performances. And it's like, well, what does that even mean? Like, who's deciding this, I guess, in the first place?
Right.
And Ezra Klein, whose interpretation of Hasan Piker and how to approach him is not so different from yours, he gives Nick Fuentes, actually, and Trump as examples of deplatforming, not accomplishing what was hoped. Like, Trump, kick him off Twitter. Well, I guess he'll just go away then. And then he wins another term with a popular vote even. So I guess what I'm asking in this extremely long-winded way is, like, there's the should one deplatform question, but there's also like, is this even a thing? Like, is it in the power of, for simplicity's sake, American Jews to deplatform Hasan Piker if we, I am also American, wanted to?
Right. I mean, the short answer is no. It's not, right? Kanye West is performing at who I think is, whatever your views on Israel, truly wherever you are on the spectrum of Israel, I think we can agree that Kanye West multiple times crossed the line into just really hideous anti-Semitism, and he's performing at arenas with the crowd cheering along. So no, it's not possible for us to deplatform. Now, as individual institutions, individuals, organizations, of course, we can say, I think that this person is anti-Semitic. I think that this person disgraced himself by appearing with him. I think, and people can sort of take that on or not. But if the question is this up to American Jews? I think the answer is no. And I think, to your point about the Overton window, like, I think particularly around criticism of Israel, I think, I want to be careful how I say this, but I think that so much in this country, so much that has been called so much that his criticism of Israel has been called anti-Semitic that is not. That there's a sort of fatigue. I think basically we have anti-Semitism fatigue in this country at a time when actually it's quite where it is real and it is quite scary, and it's sort of like the worst possible, not the worst possible, but we have an unfortunate meeting of various conditions. And I just think the idea that that now saying, but Hasan Piker should be off limits, like no, people aren't going to listen. And so then the question is, well, how do you engage and what do you call out, right? Like it's because the answer to your second question is short version, no, it's not going to work. The first, then the question becomes, what do you do with it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to be this sort of third person sitting here who is well to, I guess, either of our political right, because, to represent what that is. So you write, and I'm quoting from your article, Piker's popularity is one of the many signs that there is no going back to a past U.S. in which Jews could assume non-Jews or even other Jews supported Israel or Zionism, end quote. So that is definitely where things are at now.
Yep.
What I have seen, and I'm just sort of like paraphrasing something I saw when trying to do some background reading for this on X, was somebody was saying that this whole Palestine thing is going to have been a fad. And I think that there is this kind of sense, and while that was a very glib thing, that remark, obviously, Palestinians are people is not, a fad, whatever. But I if you take the sort of layer of glib, provocateur, whatever, away from that, basically saying this is the thing now, but it might change. And my sense is that on whether you want to call it the right, on a more sort of traditional Jewish Zionist position, is basically some of it is a kind of waited out, that this might. And I think when I sort of zoom out and try to think about this, I don't know where things are going to be. And I could think of all sorts of reasons, some grim, some not, why things could change very, very dramatically and sympathies could shift widely any direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think some of this is I don't know.
And I also want to caution against, I am not one of these people who takes the view of history that anti-Semitism has always been there and it only gets worse. And I don't think that's true, right? I think this, and this idea that, the golden age of American Jews is behind us. I think that's, the rest of the story hasn't been written yet. And I think it's important to push back against that tendency. However, what I do think is that in the near future, what we have is on the left and the right, both the political parties and the sort of political ideologies, people for different reasons becoming much more critical of Israel, much more willing to say it out loud. And that meanwhile, in Israel itself, we have, let's just say, increasing political extremism that is not going to lend itself to behavior that will check either of those on left or right, either of those critiques, right? So in the near future, at least, I think the idea that this is just going to go away, that people are just going to forget Gaza or they're just going to forget the West Bank, even if those weren't ongoing issues, which they are, right? Mm-hmm. That people are just going to get over it. I think there will be times when it's more in the news, but that's different from we're just going to go back to 1996, which I don't see happening.
No, I don't think we're going back to 1996 either. Although for music and clothing, that would be
sure.
Nice. Yes, that I think that there was this moment after October 7th where it seemed like the kind of bulwark against right-wing anti-Semitism in a weird way was this kind of common cause against the proverbial blue-haired, omnicause encampment protester who was very left-wing coded, right? So it did seem like even if it was not appealing, even if actual American Jews are on the whole Democrats and more liberal, there was this thing where Republicans just were not going to make common cause with a college student in a kafia because they just that was enemy of my enemies or whatever these things. And then it seems like something has shifted on the right where it really is. And I think that is the significant thing that's happened in American politics when it comes to Jews at this point, is that like that sort of consensus that I did not particularly anticipate. But I do also want to talk, though, about this bizarre video. So did you watch this video?
Well, I did. And okay, so you describe it and then I'll give my take about why it's been so discourse generated.
So 3 people, none of whom are without platform, 2 of whom have documented tremendous wealth. I don't know about the interviewer herself. I only know that she's the daughter of famous people, but then again, so is Lena Dunham, and we can talk about Lena Dunham too if you want, but not like super, super famous people, but like whatever. These are not 3 powerless individuals. Had this conversation about how we, the powerless, can fight back at the man. And rather than having a conversation about how taxes should be higher, how programs should be better funded, how whatever the social safety net should be, anything, or universal health care, whatever, any sort of like concrete thing, it became about how one of the participants had stolen lemons from Whole Foods and was not going to apologize because she was stealing them for a poor friend who she speaks about in like slightly, I thought, condescending terms. Regardless, it became about them. It became about the people. And there is an underlying important and relevant in Canada, certainly, discussion about the price of groceries. And that did not end up being what anybody could hear. And I'm not even sure that was what was intended, because this was this kind of like infotainment situation. That would be my description. And it's the room itself is amazing. They're in this like beautiful room looking very, well-heeled, discussing this.
So, okay.
Yes.
And this has like torn group chats across the country apart. I think it's a couple of things. First of all, if this were just the 3 of them, like on their text chain or meeting up, having a sort of like half serious, half goofy debate about this, okay, whatever. I personally still think that if like you should be paying for your lemons from Whole Foods, even if Jeff Bezos owns it, like he's not the person you're hurting. This is my own personal take, but like,
no, that's my take. That's my take as well. Yes.
This 3 of you, like half joking, half opining, half thinking through the modern day through this sort of goofy lens, like that's okay. Do whatever you want, but that's not what you were doing. You're in the New York Times. And so the reaction to it was the most predictable thing in the world, which is that it's the New York Times is, to go back to our earlier discussion, like platforming, progressive shoplifters. And then of course they all become, it's like the left is shoplifting, even though we're talking about a New Yorker essay, journalist, essayist, writer, a streamer, and Art Spiegelman's daughter, who's also a journalist interviewer in her own right. Like, but as you say, like they're not totally non-political because again, they are engaging with this political conversation in this way. So I think the fallout was completely predictable. And I think, if I'm the New York Times, maybe I say, well, it got people talking and that's good enough. I think for me, Emily, like that's not good enough, right? Like this is the one journalistic entity that we still have in this country. Like, please think about the conversations that you're generating. And also, I think that part of the fallout was a tempest in a teacup, right? I think that there was something so Trump 1.0 or so like something kind of comforting about debating these 3 media personalities talking about stealing lemons instead of talking about the things that you're talking, which is like why grocery prices are so high, and that we have this president who changes his reason for being at war with Iran every week to take just one carving chestnut that he's engaged in. Like there was just something very small about the discourse, and I think that's part of why. But I think that's part of why it took off in the way that it did, is that we didn't have to talk about the underlying structural blah 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 blah. We were talking about like Gia and Hasan and shoplifting.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I mean, it just was funny to me because like so very long ago, I wrote a book saying that privilege callouts are counterproductive. And yet here, I really do think that is the only thing that made sense to interpret this by, because it did seem like this kind of obliviousness of like, if you're not Gia Tolentino and you steal lemons, how does it go for you? You know what I
Well,
mean?
yes.
And also just
how do you carry yourself now in this time when if you're on the internet and you have a position of any kind of power or prominence or whatever, how do you move, right? And what does it mean to have coherent politics or not, given that sort of nebulous state that you yourself are in, where it's like, well, I'm a journalist and a writer, I'm not a politician, and yet I opine on politics, and this will be taken by some as a political call, and also I want to make money, and also like how do you navigate all of that, and then how do the rest of us, here in the discourse churn, what do we do with it?
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.